Okay, welcome everybody for our Tuesday night Torah study. Glad you came out. Boy, it's warm today. Oh, here comes Dave, the cameraman. Let me open in a word of prayer. Well, Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for this time that we're going to spend together discussing your Torah. We just thank you for your Torah. We thank you that we're just beginning to glimpse how amazing it is, how it really is it contains your truth and the words that we should live by. I'd ask that you just be with us this evening as we look at these stories and see how they apply to us. And I just thank you, Father God. I just thank you that you've opened our hearts to be able to see these things. In Yahushua's name, amen. Okay, so I always kind of like to talk about where we were. Last week, we got Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed, and then we had Lot and his two daughters start the tribes of the Ammonites and the Moabites. So let's see, just the geography thing I like to do because it helps if you can kind of imagine where these things are. So as we've said before, more than likely, Sodom and Gomorrah were at the south end of the Dead Sea here, and the Moabites and the Ammonites are to the west side here. And like I said, I was really surprised whenever I found, you know how sometimes the penny drops, and today's capital of Jordan is Amman. You think, where'd that word come from, right? Well, maybe right there. So the name of the capital of Jordan is at least 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 years old, something like that. That's just kind of cool. Did anybody have any thoughts? Or we had some fun discussions on Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot and his daughters. Okay, then we're going to start in chapter 20. Chapter 20 is not very long. It's 17, 18 verses. We'll read it, and then we'll come back, and we'll just take it apart bit by bit, and we'll talk about it. And I found chapter 20, to me, is very mysterious. And so I'm looking forward with the discussion because I'm hoping that we can find some things here because it's one of those ones where you say, I don't know why this is here. So let's read chapter 20 and see how it goes. Who would like to read chapter 20? No volunteer. I'll read it if nobody's going to volunteer. Okay, I'll read it. That means I have to put on my glasses, though, which is pretty bad. Okay. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." And then Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die." Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. And then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" And Abraham replied, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, my land is before you. Live wherever you like. And to Sarah he said, I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who were with you. You are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls so that they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. What an interesting story, huh? So, let's go back to the beginning and kind of look what's going on here. The first verse says, now Abraham moved on from there. Do you know where the there is? Where was Abraham living before this? It ought to be easy for you. Yeah, that Hebron, right? Hebron. So he was living here at Hebron. Theoretically, he could walk not far from where he was living, get up on this crest of this hill here, and look down on the Dead Sea and probably see Sodom and Gomorrah. As a matter of fact, if this thing is chronological, then the last thing he did was go up on that hill and look down there and see smoke and all kinds of horrible, horrific, nuclear warfare kinds of things, and it might have kind of shocked him or upset him somewhat. Just saying. So he says, Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev. The Negev is it's a Hebrew word, and it typically applies to the area in the very south part of Israel. But Negev, the word, means south. So the Negev would be the south. And he lived between Kadesh and Shur. Shur is, neither of those are on the map. Shur is somewhere over in here, pretty much on the coast. And Kadesh, if you drew a line from right here up to the Mediterranean, Kadesh is about halfway down it. So he went over and lived somewhere between Shur and Kadesh, which would be over here, about the B in Beersheba, okay? Today we would say it was probably Gaza, or maybe just a little bit east of Gaza. That's where this was. That's where he went. And for a while he stayed in Gerar. That's where Gerar is. And there Abraham said of his wife, she is my sister. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's the area of the Philistines. The Philistines lived there. Yeah.
So why did he move? He just says he moved. Why?
That's a very good question. Why do you suppose he moved? Polly's got a thought. Go ahead.
If he was close to Sodom and Gomorrah, and he was a wealthy man, and those were maybe his customers.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, there goes my customers.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
I need a new market.
Yeah, could be that. It is fun to think about stuff like that, yeah.
Actually, John isn't too far off from what I was going to share, that I had been reading on some of the history of Abraham that's been written or recorded and passed down. So I don't know if you still have one of your maps that had like the highways, the traveled highways with you tonight.
Let's see, I only have one other map, and it's that one.
Okay, that would work then.
Okay.
Actually, so what I was looking at is that Haran was a major roadway. A lot of people stopped there that were traveling.
Yep.
And Abraham, being a man that loved to talk to people and drash and share his view of God and life and kind of what we do at Oneg.
Yeah.
Share what we're all about. He had lots of people that he would bring into his home and dialogue and share and spread what his thought and vision of God was: one God, one land, one people.
Yep.
Where there's other people that have thoughts of other things. He was sharing there's one God, one land, one people. And John is correct. What is recorded is that what took place in Sodom and Gomorrah diminished the travel there. He didn't have as many people coming by that he could bring in and host. He was very big in hospitality.
Uh-huh.
So that was one of the, this is recorded anyway, as, whether this is true or not, this is not biblical.
Yeah, I understand.
But that he moved from there because of that to a place where there was more people that he could continue to share.
Yeah, there's
With-
bound to be more people over in here near the sea. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then another thing that I think both of you kind of alluded to, certainly someone to trade with, someone to interact with, but it could also be there might be just a certain amount of healthy fear involved. I mean, after you saw what went on, he saw what went on in Sodom and Gomorrah, he might thought, well, this might not be a place to hang around. Not that it's, it's over now, but he might have thought that, well, I don't know if I want to hang around and watch the aftermath or be involved with it. Just a thought. Who knows?
Maybe it was the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's what it was. But anyway, he went on down basically to Gerar, down in here. And he met Abimelech, the king of Gerar. Now, what is the name? Abimelech. You guys are all Hebrew scholars. Abimelech, what do you think that kind of might mean?
Father King.
Father king. Melech is king, and Abi is actually, it's my father. So it's my father the king, if you will. And a lot of people think that Abimelech might be more of a title than a name, although it could have been a name also. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to comment on his travels.
Yeah.
Since Yahweh said that he was going to give him everywhere where his foot had trod.
Yep.
He'd go so far and stop and go so far and stop. Maybe he hadn't finished trekking.
Well, that's a good point. As a matter of fact, one of the things that someone pointed out is that if you're careful, this was said. I didn't go through and check it out. It never says that he dwelled anywhere. It says he sojourned there, and there's a difference. Sojourning means you're visiting. It might be a long-term visit, but you're visiting. Whereas dwelling means that's your home. That's where I'm going to live. And so while he stayed in many places for many years, he always considered it a sojourn. He always considered it, he's just moving around. I mean, he didn't build a city, is the point. Most of the places that have names because cities were built there. Yeah. Well, he's pretty wealthy, we're going to figure out here. So anyway, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. Now, does this sound like something we read before? When was the last time this happened?
The Pharaoh?
Beg your pardon?
With the Pharaoh?
Yeah, with the Pharaoh when they went down to Egypt. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll wait. I have some comments on this, but I'll wait.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to say is that I'm willing to talk more about this. What is up with this? Well, two things. The first time we read this, we thought, why in the world would some guy introduce his wife as his sister? And I still, to this day, don't have a good understanding of how that protects him. How that gives him some level of protection that introducing her as his wife doesn't give him. That's still not clear to me. But it was clear to me from the first time that it didn't work out well for him, right? And so here he is going to do it again. So I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Could it be that maybe Abraham had heard something about Amalek that caused him to fear? And it was kind of a self-preservation, a self-guarding himself.
Yeah.
Evidently, there had to be something in the background.
Yeah.
Or I don't think Abraham would arbitrarily just go up and say, hey, she's not my wife, she's my sister.
Yeah.
So evidently he heard something about Amalek that he was afraid
Yeah, well,
of.
it could be. He could have heard. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but the Philistines are thought to be a large, intimidating race, if you will, and he might not have felt very safe. Could also be, again, with Sodom and Gomorrah going up in smoke, he could say, my gosh, the whole world is coming apart. I don't, well, and he says further on down there, he says, it's pretty clear from just wandering around here, there's no fear of God in this place, so there's lots of reasons that he might be afraid. The point I was making is I still can't figure out quite why introducing his wife as his sister helps that, but that's neither here nor there. I may never figure that out. Yeah.
There's something that I find interesting about this whole story. He's been walking with God. Not too long ago, he had God for dinner over
Yep.
in his tent.
Yep.
And prior to that, he rescued Lot.
Yep.
So he's a warrior. He's not a wimp.
Nope.
And he's got that relationship with God, but yet he's so concerned about his safety. When he goes here, he lies.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems, according to verse 13, that this might not have been the only two times, because he told Sarah for her to tell people
Yeah.
whenever they meet people that this is my brother. I
Yeah.
don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, but
One of the things that I've read a lot of stuff about that. One of the things that was brought up is whenever John kind of got me on this or Marvin about the lie. Whenever he says, this is my sister, he's not lying, right? Because if you believe what he said, and you should, I suppose, is Abraham is Sarah's father, but by a different mother, okay? So she is his half-sister. So to say this is my sister is not an out-and-out lie, but he clearly knows that the person that's hearing this is going to walk away and not realize that she's also his wife. And so the question in this thing I was reading is that a lie or not? Well, Bill Clinton would say that's not a lie. But on the other hand, it's very obvious that he did it with an intent to deceive, because he knew very well that the person that was hearing this was going to walk away and think, well, that's only his sister, rather than that's his wife. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. It's for all those that like to idolize these guys, they're just like everybody else. Yeah. You go ahead. Well, you can go ahead, Pat.
I'm thinking that perhaps just because he believed that it was not right to take someone else's wife, he may not have had the belief that these wicked people he was traveling with had the same belief. So he may have thought that if he was the husband and they wanted the wife, they would just kill him to get her,
Yeah.
because they're not believers in
Yep.
adultery like he. However, he later found out that
Yeah.
God let him know that that was a wrong thing to
Yeah.
do, but we don't know that he thought that before God presented it.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
So I haven't researched this, but in a conversation with my spouse.
That's not your sister, right?
No, she's not my sister. She is my wife.
Okay.
But I guess she could, in a broader sense, be called my sister, but we won't get into that.
We don't want to go down that road very far.
She was saying that one of the customs, and I don't know where she read this, one of the customs was that if you were sojourning or traveling, often you would offer your daughters in hand in marriage, or your daughters would be available, a daughter would be available. Abraham didn't have any daughters to make peace with, so therefore...
Though there's a couple, yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
Like
no,
I
there's
said,
a couple
I
of
haven't
things going on
researched
there.
it, so-
One of the things is we do know in this culture that it was, a father that had daughters was constantly looking for the ability to marry the daughter off and get a dowry. Then it was kind of like, oh man, that's been weighing on me for a long, long time now. Now it's done. I've got my dowry, and she's got a husband, and life's good. So there's that. There's the fact that daughters were negotiated. Then there is also the fact, as you point out, that rulers and people of that class would a lot of times, because they could have multiple wives, they would take wives that had political meaning in the culture. And so by having his daughter, or I'm sorry, his sister as his wife, it would be a kind of a treaty between Abraham and his forces and Abimelech and his. And as a matter of fact, that's probably why he did that.
So my thought when we were talking, I said, now here's Sarah. She's going to be like 90 years old.
99, but go ahead. No, 90.
No,
I'm
90,
sorry. Yeah.
90 years old.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is Abimelech going to see in this 90-year-old woman?
Well,
and then the thing is, maybe like you said, the whole political aspects.
Yeah.
Abraham is very wealthy. They could have heard about some of the battles that he had with the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. So here's a sister that now he bridges this treaty. I don't know,
No.
but it does raise a lot of interesting questions.
Yes, it does. And all of them give this, to me, the whole story a little more air of plausibility. We're just not told those details. Yeah. John.
I have a comment I got from Ahavta, which is an online thing that shows the triennial verses. Anyway,
Okay.
the differences between the story in Genesis 12, this is about the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh compensated Abraham for Sarai. It makes no mention of anything like that in Genesis 20. The compensation found in 2014 was after the fact when Yahweh informed him of his sin. Ahavta says that according to the sages, Sarah was kidnapped. I tend to agree with this. Abraham, for his actions in this chapter, was not rebuked, but Abimelech was told to go to Abraham for the sin he had committed and make restitution.
Yep. There are several differences. If you compare the stories, plus, this is the thing I really kind of wanted to, we're going to come back here because this is the second time. We're going to see the story a third time. 3 times this thing happens. And I'm convinced that there's some significant meaning. When the Bible tells you something 3 times, you should be, that's important. But I've got to tell you, I feel real uncomfortable with the fact that I'm not seeing it yet. But as I read through all the different stuff I could find, there's answers like that, which help. It makes, like I say, it makes it a little more plausible, but I sure don't have the aha moment that I'd like to have. Anyway, let's go on here. You're right in that, there was no compensation mentioned at this particular point, so she may have been stolen rather than negotiated. Your comment about she's 90, why on earth would anybody want her? But she's also, if you will, she's pregnant. Well, if the story's in chronological order, she is, because, it may be early stages, but you remember the 3 visitors, what they said was, this time next year, I'll be back and you'll have a son by Sarah, right? Well, if this story is happening during that year, chances are she's pregnant. Maybe not much, but I'll just throw that out there. John?
Well, there's also, because Abimelech wants to be the husband to Sarai, or Sarah, I don't know if she's changed.
It's Sarah at this point.
Okay. There could be a question about who the father is.
Oh, yeah.
Abimelech, right?
Yep.
My father is the king. The king of Abimelech or King Yahweh?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. But, of course, nothing was consummated, so
Well, I know, but it was.
it could have been.
They could have made a claim.
Yeah, that might be why.
That's the problem. There's
might
a
be
cloud
why-
on the title.
Yeah, that might be why God stepped in so forcefully. Yeah. No, he says, this is not going to happen. Go ahead.
Well, I do find it interesting that God speaks to Abimelech. Is it Abimelech?
Abimelech or Abimelech, you can do it either way.
Speaks to him in a dream. This seems to be like something that occurs quite a bit back then.
Yeah.
I don't know that occurs so much these days. I guess some people say it does, but I don't know. But apparently they weren't so evil and unrighteous.
Well,
according to what's written in the text here.
well, let's talk about
But
that for a
maybe
second.
like you say, when they, because of the, maybe everybody all of a sudden got religion, so to speak,
Yeah.
in the area. And
Well-
they seem to know who Yahweh is.
Yeah, you
know.
touched on a whole bunch of points. First of all, it's pretty clear that Abimelech is not a believer, right? And so we're not used to people having visions necessarily that aren't believers, but we should be, because there's tons of places that we'll read about where God gives dreams and visions to people that aren't believers. So he can give a dream and a vision to anybody who wants to. All right, so that's one thing. He doesn't have to be a believer. But number two is Abraham is coming with some sort of a reputation, right? I mean, he's probably, I'd even maybe go so far as to say, obviously pretty wealthy. He's got quite a number of people in his grouping, and it seems like he's fairly, plus people may know of these stories that have gone around about him, and and then he's coming from over there with Sodom and Gomorrah, where, maybe he was instrumental in whatever happened over there. So I think they're giving him a wide berth. They're naturally kind of leery of him, and I think that may factor into it a little bit too. So, but all of those things are possible. Yeah. Joe,
Yeah, I'm just reading here.
we can't hear you if you don't talk in the mic.
In the dream that God said to him in a dream, I knew that in the innocence of your heart that you did this, and I too prevented you from sinning against me. That is why I did not permit to touch her.
Yes.
Isn't it interesting that it wouldn't be a sin against anything, but it'd be a sin against God?
Well,
And he prevented it.
yes.
Because he didn't want that to happen.
Yes. Yes, that is interesting.
Because he made a promise about Isaac.
Yeah. Yep.
As you said, there's lots of places where people who are not believers get dreams and visions.
Yep.
And he doesn't necessarily understand that this is Yahweh the way Abraham does.
Yep.
So he recognizes that it's a God.
Yes.
So
It must have been some dream or some vision, huh?
I imagine it was quite realistic.
Yep.
Because it sure put the fear of God, no pun intended, in
Yeah.
him.
Yes.
And the other thing I was going to say is, it just left me. Just
Oh, that does that to
flew
me
right
all the
out.
time.
I'll talk and maybe you'll remember. So there's a difference between being a believer and a follower, a believer and a fear,
Yeah.
or having a fear of deities.
Yep, I understand.
So, I mean, obviously he had some fear of a deity
Yeah.
or whatever.
Well, probably
But
a
not-
lot of them.
Yeah, and probably more than one, like
Yeah.
you say. So how that played in when he had this dream, he certainly didn't hesitate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Oh, it was a life-changing moment for him, no doubt
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Oh, she remembered.
I remembered.
Did you just forget again? No way.
This is serious business.
Fascinates me that there's such a long period of time probably transpired from point A to B here, because it takes a while to figure out that all of your women are not going to have children.
Yeah, that's a good point. I struggled with that too, but someone in some of the stuff that I had been reading, we haven't quite got to that point because that's a thing he kind of throws in at the very end of the story, but that this was caused by a physical abnormality. The word that was used was tumors, so that that it would have been, number one, visible, and number two, would have been real obvious that this, that these people, all the females in your party here are unable to give birth, and it's going to remain that way unless you fix this. So, don't know. Yeah.
So that was my point. I think there's a long period, or a period of time, I don't know how long, between verse 1 and verse 3. because it seems like after verse 3, he has a dream. We don't know how long of a period of time that she was with Abimelech during this time. It seems like there's some distance enough for, like what Pat mentioned, these women have noticed there's something going on
Yeah,
here.
there's something wrong here.
And it could have been, I've been looking at this, that it could have been all women were cycling, what's happened here. Our whole camp has become...
all at the same time.
Yeah, all at the same. It's something that's obvious that everybody is aware something's going on here.
Yeah.
So there's some time there. But the dream is interesting because not only is God talking to him, but he talks back. They're having a conversation in this dream, which is very interesting.
That's
and he
unusual.
wakes up the next morning and knows this was not just a dream. I was speaking to God, and we need to do something. He immediately calls Abraham because it tells us that happened the very next day after the dream.
Yeah.
So there's no time beyond that.
Furthermore, the first thing he does, he gets all his people in there, all his
Council
troops.
together.
And man, they're not mincing any words here. He's clearly frightened. And by the time he's through explaining what happened, it says, what does it say? Well, anyway, there's some words in there that everybody was dreadfully afraid. It says, let me find it.
Why have you done this to us? How have I wronged you that you brought such guilt upon me? Perhaps verse 9.
No, let's see. Okay. Okay. Oh, verse 8, early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. So it's not like, oh, let me tell you about this interesting dream I had last night. I mean, it was because he obviously included the detail about how if we don't fix this, we're all going to die.
The other interesting part, and I hadn't really thought of this till John mentioned it, that we see here that it was also Abimelech that needed to be healed. So that does take out the possibility that there was any other father involved here for Isaac other than Abraham.
Yes.
Yeah, there
Yes.
was.
Yeah, I think that's probably a key point that I've learned from the discussion so far, that this was God's way of making sure that there was no question about Isaac. Go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, I think it was Joe that said that, or you said that she was pregnant. So in verse 4, I think word got around about Abraham, and how he was supposed to be a father of many nations.
Mm-hmm.
In the 4 here, he says, and he, would be Elohim, said to him, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? So it's like, that sure is an indicator that you mentioned she was pregnant already, so she was carrying a righteous nation.
No, that's a thought. I hadn't read it that way, but it could be.
But
As a matter of fact, what I thought he was basically saying, this was Abimelech talking to God, and he basically said, the word mine doesn't use righteous, mine uses innocent. And Abimelech's argument is, you know that I didn't know
the
about...
last part of 4.
You know that I didn't know about her being his wife. He's talking to God. He says, you know, God, that I did this out of innocence. I didn't know. And he's basically appealing to God. He says, you couldn't destroy all our nation just because I made a mistake, an unwitting mistake, an unknowing mistake, if you will.
Hagoy Gam Tzadik.
What
So,
is?
righteous nation. That's what it is.
It
literally.
says Goy
Hagoy, the nation.
and Zadok.
And Zadok.
Zadok,
yeah.
that's righteous. You're right. You're right. It's funny how the editors make it say what they want it to say, and then
The word used in, I think that's verse 7, it says, but if you do not restore her, shuv. If you do not return
her.
Yeah.
Good
shuv.
point. Good catch. I like that.
It's interesting to see that Abraham felt like he was putting one over Amalek, because Abraham had a misconception, because in verse 11 because I said there is no fear of God in this place, and they will slay me because of my wife. Why would Abraham know about that? Was there something in where Amalek was that there was no sin, or was there sin?
Well, that's we're not quite there yet, but let me answer the question. Abraham, by virtue, I mean, he knew what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he just watched the place get nuked, right? And so he's over here and he's thinking, man, you know, God sent me to this place and told me that this is going to be mine and all this land is going to belong to me and all our kids and everything. And he says, man, this is sure a bad place. Look at what's going on around here. And so I think he probably had a good, healthy, you know, rejuvenation of his natural fear about the societies that were in there with him. So, yeah, you're right. It doesn't say that he had a reason to be fearful, but I can imagine that he was.
Also, could it be that Abraham was equating what God had did to Sodom and Gomorrah that he would not do to where Amalek was?
No, I don't think he was equating that at all. I think he was saying, if he did this to Sodom and Gomorrah, I bet you there's people here living in these other places that are just as bad. So, you know, like I say, I think Abraham was really kind of going, whoo, this is a little more than I'd bargained for.
Who has the question? Oh, I thought you had.
So going off of what Polly said earlier, if you consider that Abraham would have been along the trade routes, he would have met people who lived in all different regions, he probably would have had a good idea of what the customs were. Yep. And the people who followed different gods, and that, you know, he would have had a pretty good idea about those regions.
And vice versa.
And yeah, and so on. So.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, I often think about this. You can't know these kind of things, but we know that these individual cities kind of had their own religions. A lot of them were very common among them, but they had, you know, there's like it that way clear up through the Greek and Roman times where cities were known for the worship of so-and-so, you know. And all of them were offensive to God in one sense or another. And then here's Abraham kind of wandering around from place to place, and they know something's different about him because he doesn't ever want to move in and be a part of the city. He's sojourning, and his belief and worship in God is different than all of theirs, but yet they watch him prosper. You know, they know something's up with him. Yeah.
So I'm a little confused about Abimelech is making a claim for his nation that it's righteous.
Yes, that's what I thought it said. Let me read it again. And you
well,
guys...
yours only said whether it was innocent.
Well, okay, righteous. I'll take righteous.
But but he's making the claim for himself, for his nation. That's what.
Yeah, he's basically saying, look, what he's saying is, you know, God, that I did this based on the fact that I thought Sarah was his sister. That's what he told me.
Well, that's him. Maybe that's him being righteous or not sinning, but he's claiming my nation is righteous.
Well, that's because God had threatened to kill him and all his people. I mean, you know, he's concerned about. He's not just concerned about himself. He's concerned about the whole bunch of them.
But I guess my claim is, if she was kidnapped, and that's a theory, you know, it's speculation. Your claim about being a righteous nation isn't so compelling.
Well, yeah. Well, that's assuming that kidnapping is a bad thing for you. I don't know.
I think verse 16 is interesting after the whole issue has been that this is a husband and wife team. Mm-hmm. He says to Sarah, I'm giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. He refers to him as your brother after this whole conversation.
That is interesting. Yeah. Well, you know, that was an interesting point I was going to talk. Let me finish, make sure we've done all the couple of things. His argument to God, is it correct? Now, I'm notwithstanding the...
No, it's correct that I didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, I think he's got a pretty compelling...
He's saying you're getting ready...
He's innocent.
To paraphrase it, you're threatening to judge me on something that I'm innocent of.
Yeah, in the context, what he's speaking of, God brings up one thing. He's righteous in the sense that he was unknowing about that one thing. They're not discussing whether God's going to destroy that nation for all these other reasons.
That's right.
It's only one thing.
It's only that
in
one thing.
In that context,
Yeah.
he's claiming
Yeah.
righteous
That's what
for
he's
what
doing.
he did.
As a matter of
That's
fact, it says here, he says, I have done this with clear conscience and clean hands. Meaning that, what you're accusing, that particular aspect, all the bad stuff I've done, let's put that aside for a minute. That particular aspect I'm not guilty of.
So this is similar to Abraham bargaining with God regarding Sodom and Gomorrah to a degree. He's saying, he's making a claim.
Yeah,
you
he's making a claim.
You can't just say, well, I feel that this is not right. He's stating a claim.
Yes, he's
talking
very
in
specific.
law.
Very specific. yeah.
Right.
And then he goes on in verse 6, and then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. I assume that means by keeping him away from Sarah. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. Okay? The word prophet.
That's the first time it's used.
Navi. Navi, that's the first time the word's used in the Bible. And Navi, what does it mean?
What does a prophet mean?
Yeah, what does Navi mean?
Well, it's prophet, but I mean, what does it
Okay,
mean?
what's a prophet do?
A prophet? Well, there's a difference. It's to me, it's about warning of things that could happen. It isn't so much predicting the future, like, look at how awesome I am because I predicted the future.
Yeah.
It's a warning of something that's going to happen, and you need to do so. It's also a teacher of Torah to a degree.
Yeah. It's that, but both of those I think are more specific. I think literally it means one who speaks for God. And that's essentially all it means, one who speaks for God. So, but anyway, it's important that God calls Abraham a prophet. He calls Abraham a prophet to Abimelech, indicating that Abimelech must kind of have a feeling for what that word means.
What did Amalek said to Abraham, what did you see that you did such a thing? What was it that Abraham saw?
He didn't see anything. What basically Abimelech is saying, he said, why, he's not saying, what did you see? He's basically saying, why'd you do this? Maybe he's saying, what did you see that would make you want to do this? That's what he's saying. I don't know. That goes back to the question of why was Abraham afraid? And then, well, he says, though, he answers the question, Joe. Right down the next thing. He says, in the verse 11, I said to myself, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they'll kill me because of my wife.
So who are you going to believe? Abimelech, who claims it's a righteous nation, or Abraham?
Yeah.
Abram.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Who's got more cred with God? He just got to call him a prophet.
Yeah. Yeah. But let's see. I want to go back up to verse 7. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die. Now,
That sounds like a salvation message to me.
well, that's a fair point. That's the thing is if that same sentence had been said by Moses to Pharaoh, from what we've read about Pharaoh would have said, well, that's okay, bring him on, I'm ready, right? But Abimelech says, I know that what I'm going through in this dream is something a little bit, this is dealing with forces of which I know not, and I better pay attention. So Abimelech just immediately said, okay, uncle, I do this. But I think that's interesting because other people don't. Like I say, Pharaoh didn't, because Moses pretty much said that. Yeah.
Well, from what I've read, and I might be missing, anytime that God appears to somebody in a dream, they listen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a little bit different than having a spokesman or a prophet come and tell you something. But when he appears to people in a dream in the Bible, they listen.
Yeah.
Like E.F. Hutton, they say when E.F. Hutton speaks, people
The
listen.
whole restaurant goes quiet,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, okay. Let's see. Whenever Abimelech, gets after him and says, "Why have you done this thing? Why have you brought such danger on me?" Abraham basically gives three reasons. The first reason was that, as I came over here and looked around and saw this, what a lawless place this was, I thought, surely there's no fear of God here. And that the second is because she really is my sister as well as my wife. And then another interesting thing there is he goes on in verse 13, he says, "When God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, 'This is how you can show your love for me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother.'" I still don't get that. But anyway.
I find it interesting that when you mentioned verse 7 about him telling him he needs to have Abraham pray for him.
Mm-hmm.
So restoring Sarah is only half of
Yep.
what he has to do.
It's a good point.
If he doesn't get Abraham to pray for him and intercede
Yep.
and be a mediator, that everybody's going to die.
Yep.
So that kind of puts a whole new light on.
That's a very good point. It certainly changes Abimelech's view of Abraham.
Yes.
Yeah, because he realizes that Abraham has the power of life or death over him
Yeah.
and his nation, if you will.
And the only thing I can think of with the whole tell him I'm your brother
Yeah.
is there must have been something culturally amongst the people there that it was safer to be a brother than it was to be a husband.
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess it must be that.
Yeah. Although I did read something today that said that there was some tradition or cultural thing where when a man would marry a woman, that he would also adopt her as a sister, something to do with inheritances
Yep.
and stuff like that.
Yep. I remember. I read that same thing. I felt like that was the, yeah. We're about through here. Let me finish this thing. Verse 14. I'm sorry, Polly, did you have something?
Well, I just wanted to comment back on your verse 7 comment about, "Now return the man's wife, he's a prophet, he will pray for you and you will live."
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that I never had saw that till you pointed out that we have an example here of a man praying for another or interceding for another man, this mediator between God and him, that his sin would be forgiven and he would live.
That's a
I
good
mean,
point.
that seems, I've always looked at, as Abraham as a prophet, but this almost looks like the role of the priesthood too.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, I had never had seen him in that role, or I'd noticed it till you mentioned it a minute
Yeah.
ago.
I like that. That's a good catch. Anyway, verse 14. So Abimelech brought sheep and cattle, male and female slaves, and gave them to Abraham. And he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, "My land is before you. Live wherever you like." So Abimelech is basically saying, it's kind of like what Pharaoh said, in the earlier version of this story, when Pharaoh said, "Here, take all the stuff we've given you and just go." Except he doesn't say just go. He says, "Here's a bunch of free stuff. Now, and you pick the place you want to camp, and you go camp there." He basically is trying to be as nice to him as he possibly can. Yeah.
I'm jumping down to 17.
Okay.
Where it says, so Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed him, Abimelech.
Yeah.
Are we to assume he was getting sick by the minute?
He was.
Getting sick.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact.
So he woke up feeling really bad, and it's getting worse as the day goes on.
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, I think it might even be worse than that, because it says, Abimelech, his wife, his slave. Okay. Healed Abimelech, his wife, his slave, and his slave girls, so they could have children again. So the thing that was described to me that was more likely was there's some cropped up real fast affliction that was very visible to both, primarily the women, but evidently to Abimelech both. and it made it impossible for them to procreate. John?
So this chapter has one standalone olive tov, and this is 14, and it's in between restoring and Sarah, his wife.
Okay.
So that's interesting.
All right.
What?
14. It's funny because I've read that story for a long time. It's always kind of catch you off guard. The very last verse in the chapter, for Yahweh had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife Sarah. I mean, that's how. Oh, that's kind of an important detail to leave to the end.
What?
One of the things I noticed in verse 15, where he tells Abraham to settle wherever you please, the word is yashab, and means to dwell or remain, but Abraham doesn't dwell.
Yeah.
You know, he's a sojourner,
Yes.
and he continues to be that.
Yeah.
But he was actually giving him permission to dwell,
Yes.
remain, sit, abide, settle, even marry that land.
Yes.
Because that word kind of means to.
Yes,
you know,
you're
marry.
exactly right. Abimelech was giving the right to live there. One of the things I also wanted to point out is in verse 16, to Sarah, this is Abimelech, to Sarah he said, Abimelech, I'm giving your brother, I didn't catch the brother part, but I'm giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Does anybody get that? Mm-hmm. So how would it work? Mark's got something there, John.
So in my translation it says, it is your vindication before all who are with you. You said cover. The Hebrew word actually is cover.
Okay.
So I'm thinking covering as in like, and the Hebrew word is kasut, but I'm wondering covering as in a, you know, like an offering,
Yep.
when an
Okay.
offering covers a sin.
Yep. That could be
Vindication and covering would be somewhat
similar. Yeah. This is a kind of a, well, I'll let you talk.
In the same sense that when a woman in those days was brought to a man, she would be veiled or covered.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying that the same way you came in covered, you're going to leave covered. Nothing had transgressed, nothing had happened, because, again, it implies that covering, that veil, still there intact.
Yeah. Somehow, sometimes this is much more clear to me than it is other times, but by providing him with 1,000 shekels of silver, it's basically saying that her reputation remains intact. It's saying that she's not been cheapened. That if you will, there's no chance Isaac's father is not Abraham. So that's kind of what I get out of that. This is an interesting story, but I still got to tell you, I'm not sure what all the meaning is, and the fact that it's in Genesis 3 times is just real interesting to me. So if anybody gets some kind of a light bulb, let me know. Any other thoughts about it?
So I just have I'm thinking the verse 15 where he gives him the land,
Yep.
it almost sounds like a lease.
Abimelech said, "My land is before you. Live wherever you like."
Right.
Yeah, it
I
sounds
don't
like a
know.
lease.
Maybe I'm being.
999-year lease or whatever. Yeah, yep. Okay, well, thanks for that.
He had to sign a liability waiver.
Yeah.
Now that John mentioned that, it just seems to me like it would have been as if he had actually taken her as a wife, but not really. But the agreement is that, okay, you're family now, or
Yeah.
you're. part of this kingdom. And here's the dowry.
Yeah. Yeah, but they're certainly trying to say that that's not what it is. Because he gave her back to him. They gave her back to Abraham. But I understand your point. Well, let's move on. Chapter 21. The first, 8 verses of chapter 21, 7 verses, are pretty quick and easy, and we can do those. Somebody would like to read, and Paul raised his hand. I know.
Then Yahweh took note of Sarah, as he had said, and Yahweh did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Then Sarah said, Yahweh has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham and Sarah that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.
Okay, thanks. Now, again, we have this little snippet, and we have the 3 visitors about 3 chapters earlier. And in the 3 visitors, they said to Abraham and Sarah, we will return again next year at about this time, and you will have a son. So if this story, if this whole thing is chronological, and a lot of times it isn't, but if it's chronological, then this thing with Abimelech had to happen between those 2 events. Just saying.
So,
Mark's got, okay, go ahead. But you go ahead first,
I'm
John.
just looking at the conceived. It's telling there it's conceived after all this.
It could be. Could be.
So in verse 2 it says, at the Moed. What Moed do you think it was?
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. It says at the appointed time.
Now, when you go back to when he made the promise to Abraham that it'd be, I'll return to you at this same time this year, a year later, I just went back and looked. And it was, I'm pretty certain, yeah. In Genesis 18:14, is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the Moed, I will return to you at this time next year, and she will have a son.
Uh-huh.
So both times, at the exact same year apart, both instances it's claiming as a Moed.
Yep. What did we decide that was?
Well,
I mean, they talked, when the visitors were there, they talked about the heat of the day and Abraham being outside of his tent, sitting.
yeah.
So that does, I was going to say, that doesn't say Shavuot to me. I'm sorry, doesn't say Sukkot to me.
No.
But it could be.
Yeah, it could be. So you're thinking, one would think this is a covenant is being made and promised and brought to fruition. So I'm wondering, it's obviously got to be Passover or
Shavuot.
Shavuot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the two.
Yeah, really good. That's kind of what I thought too. Yeah.
Could a hint be that he gave him unleavened bread?
Well, yes, it certainly could be. Although I might point out that the unleavened bread could also have occurred because they had to make the bread right then before they ate. So, but yeah. Anyway, that's good. Okay, I guess the only 2 things to talk about really right there is that what does Abraham and Sarah's son's name mean? Isaac means laughter, right? And what did Abraham do with Isaac when he was 8 days old? Yep, and that was because of the covenant that the covenant with Abraham is revealed to us through stories in about 3 different locations, and we aren't told about the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision, until the last one. But when Abraham heard about, finally got all of it, and learned about the requirement to circumcise his sons, you remember he did it immediately, and the rule was do it on the 8th day. So here we are learning that Abraham. I mean, it's fun to just stop at this point and reflect on the fact that Abraham's changed a lot, hadn't he? Yeah.
So circumcised is, in this context, vayamal, right? So you get moil from yamal.
Oh, I didn't know that.
vayamal.
Cool.
I'm just saying that's the word.
Okay. Are there any other? Let's see. Just for sake of argument, you remember how old Abraham and Sarah were when Isaac was born? 190. 100 for Abraham, 90 for Sarah. Yeah. Interesting, huh? Okay, let's go on from chapter 8, or from verse 8 through verse 21. Someone like to read verse 8 through 21 of that chapter? Okay, going to get Mike to do it. Yeah.
8 to 21?
Yeah, from 8 to 21.
And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Mitzrian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. So she said to Abraham, "Drive out this female servant and her son, for the son of this female servant shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac." And the matter was very evil in the eyes of Abraham because of his son. But Elohim said to Abraham, "Let it not be evil in your eyes because of the boy and because of your female servant. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed is called. And of the son of the female servant I also make a nation, because he is your seed." And Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, which he gave to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, also the boy, and sent her away. And she left, wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down about a bow shot away, for she said, "Let me not see the death of the boy." And she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And Elohim heard the voice of the boy, and the messenger of Elohim called to Hagar from the heavens and said to her, "What is the matter with you, Hagar? Do you not fear? For Elohim has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Arise, lift up the boy and hold him with your hand, for I make a great nation of him." And Elohim opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And Elohim was with the boy, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Mitzrayim.
Okay? So this is an interesting story. So how old do you suppose Isaac was when he was weaned? Someone said 2. What do you say? Okay, 2 to 5, 3, 4, anyway, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. Okay, so based on that, how old would Ishmael have been? Do you know how? Yeah, Ishmael is 10 years older than Isaac. It was 10 years between when Ishmael was born and when Isaac was born. So he was like 13 years old. So Ishmael was like 13. So it's real easy to imagine a 13-year-old teasing and razzing his little brother at the celebration for his weaning and all that kind of stuff, right? That's an easy thing to imagine. Mark?
One may have been having a weaning and the other one's having his bar mitzvah.
Yeah. Except, yeah.
So this, in verse 12, it says, for through Isaac, your descendant, singular, it's not a plural word,
Does it now?
shall be called. It's not named. The Hebrew word means to call. Your descendant will be summoned or called through Isaac.
Well, that's obviously a messianic reference.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Interesting. I like that. So what was, let's see. We know there's already been some bad blood between Sarah and Hagar, right? Because this is not the first time Hagar ends up out in the desert. But what was Sarah's reason for wanting Abraham to send Hagar away? Hagar and Ishmael?
Well, it would be
She got mad because he was busy making fun of Isaac at this celebration, right? Do you get that? Let's see. Verse 8, the child grew up and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, they usually kind of have a little party, right? Abraham held a great feast, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. That's what mine says, was mocking. So, like I say, you can imagine this going on, right? What do 13-year-olds do? All kinds of stupid things like that, right? And she said to Abraham, so it made Sarah mad. She said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. So Sarah has been kind of irritated with Hagar for the past 13 years is one of the things I read into that. Yeah.
The Hebrew word cast out is geresh.
Geresh, okay.
Geresh, which I assume is like ger. You become now you're a ger. You're a foreigner,
Yep.
disinherited.
I would think that all makes sense, yeah. But, beg your pardon? She's speaking prophetically and probably doesn't know it. But what's her reason? What's she say? Why? She says, I don't want Ishmael to share in your inheritance. That's what she says, right? Isaac is now the son, Ishmael is not. So how does Abraham view this remark? Paul's got something.
He's distressed. It bothers him. I mean, after all, he's had, 13, 14 years to spend with Ishmael?
Yeah.
And so,
Up until just a year well, that's not true. Up until just a few years ago, Ishmael was it. Ishmael was the son, right? And I'm sure he loved him very much. But I'm sure there still was some kind of problems between Hagar and Sarah.
well, in this case, the problem wasn't because, Hagar was told to go back and submit.
Mm-hmm.
We have no indication that she didn't, but like we were talking earlier today, Wanda and I, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree, where, before Hagar was like mocking the fact that she was pregnant and Sarah wasn't.
Yeah.
Now here you got the son doing some mocking because
Well-
he's the firstborn, so to speak.
In my efforts to learn how to get along with people, the conflict had never been resolved. Anyway, so it distresses Abraham. And what does verse 12 say? So he went to God with this. God, this is going to be difficult. What should I do? And God says, you can paraphrase.
Thy bondwoman, in all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called.
Yeah. In other words,
Sorry, I was doing the King James version.
Yeah, I can see that. And I'm sure that's how God said it too. You know, it says, "Fear not, Abraham. Do what Sarah says, because your seed will be reckoned through Isaac." But then he goes on. And he says, "I will make a son of the maidservants into a nation also, because he is your offspring as well." So he basically is saying, "I'll bless Ishmael too, but it says your offspring will be reckoned through Isaac." Yes.
You got to wonder if it's like, hey, Abraham, why didn't you think about this beforehand to go to God?
Yeah.
Whether or not you should.
Yeah. Well, last Shabbat we were talking about the things that happen because we think God needs a little help. Ishmael was the result of Sarah and Abraham thinking God needed a little help. Okay? And now God comes along about 10 years later and says, "No, I had this all under control. Next year, Sarah's going to have a son." And that's the one I was talking about, not Ishmael. Yes.
But it's within the realm of possibility. If they could have resolved their issue, right?
Oh, yeah.
Then if Hagar could have controlled her son instead of having this conflict,
Yeah.
this problem wouldn't have this issue wouldn't have to come up. It was this not having shalom in the home was forced the issue.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think so. Okay, so once God tells Abraham what he should do, how long does Abraham sit and think about this and just decide? The next day, the next morning. So, if there's one thing I really admire about Abraham, is the fact that, I can just see me. I'd spend 2 or 3 weeks thinking and cogitating, and are you sure I got that right? And come on, surely not. But not Abraham. Said, okay, fine, let's get on with it.
I think we ought to consider the possibility that Abraham's consequences are partly his own fault,
Oh, yeah.
because he did not step in and help father discipline the child. It's not all Hagar's fault.
Well, I agree with that. But you could even go back farther than that and say that whose idea was it to have a child by Hagar? It was Sarah's. And Abraham right then should have said, no, let's not do this.
Well, that's true, but he was raising him along with Hagar,
Yeah.
and he could have.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Sure. If there's one thing that there are many, many examples of in Genesis, it's dysfunctional families. So early the next morning, verse 14, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, and he set them on her shoulder and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Okay, the point being, again, that they were probably camped out over here somewhere. Here's Beersheba right there. And Beersheba wasn't anything at that time. We'll read more about that in a few minutes. But they wandered off down this way, basically, down toward the south and the west. Okay, didn't get very far probably. And that area, I've been there, it's not at all unlike here. It's very similar to here. There's kind of scrubby little bushes growing around here and there. It's drier and all get out and hot. And so they were wandering out in the desert. And the water in the water skin was gone. She put the boy, this is verse 15, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation, which is what he had told Abraham. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and so she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy to drink. So basically, God sent a messenger, and the messenger found Hagar and her son down there and said, here's some water, and then they survived. Polly's got something.
add to maybe something that Pat just mentioned about Abraham being part of raising Isaac, okay? The piece that you just read, let me go back to verse 16,
Okay.
where it says, I cannot watch the boy die. As she sat there, she began to sob.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little note that the she in the Hebrew and the Septuagint is translated as the child. And it really makes more sense in reading it. As the
does.
child sat there nearby, the child began to sob. God heard the boy crying. The angel of God called to Hagar. And as you can read it, even down a little farther, God has heard the boy crying as he lies there.
It does. I've always been confused by that.
Yeah, so, going back to Pat's comment, perhaps he did listen to what his father said about God. He's in a desperate place, and this 10-year-old boy is crying out to God. God hears him and intervenes on behalf of the boy crying out to him, not Hagar calling out to him.
That could very well be. I think that's probably a more realistic interpretation. Yeah, I like that.
So why does God talk to Hagar, not to the son?
I don't know. I liked it before you said that.
Well, John messed it up. No, well, Ishmael's name means God will hear. So
Good point. Good point. Anyway, in verse 20 it says, God was with the boy as he grew up, and he lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife from Egypt. A couple little things there. Lived in the desert. So he lived over in here probably, which is not far from Egypt. Egypt, depending on who's running the Sinai Peninsula at the time, Egypt's right there. But they lived away from Abraham and Sarah and their tent, if you will. They were on their own. But this is clearly not the last time that he's involved with the family. And they weren't all that far away. They were, I don't know. I've heard people say that, it's good to be at least a 3 or 4 hour drive from your relatives and stuff like that. So they were far enough away, but it wasn't so far that they never saw each other. And the reason I say that is when Abraham dies, Ishmael's there to help bury him. Ishmael and Isaac bury Abraham. So Ishmael still remains involved, if you will. He's just not told, nothing else is told about him in Genesis because it's not part of the rest of God's story. Yeah,
Oh, that makes sense.
it does, I think. Do you have something else? Or are you just going to tell me that made sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. Why do you think it's important that his mother got a wife for him from Egypt?
In the neighborhood.
Beg your pardon?
In the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood. Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
She's Egyptian is
Yeah.
probably what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so she probably even made contacts with
Yeah.
guys,
I was
people
just
back
thinking
home.
right now, going back to the previous chapter, when we're talking about Sarah and Abraham and Abimelech, it seems like we kind of forgot about Hagar and Ishmael.
Isaac, Ishmael, yeah.
They were there too.
Yes, they were.
And so when Abimelech saw them, and he probably saw that Hagar is the one that had the son.
Hey, that's a good point. That's
you
a
know,
good thing to
it's
think
like-
about.
And so,
All the more reason to think that Sarah's his sister.
right.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when Abraham sent Ishmael and Hagar out, he probably figured, well, Abimelech is in the area and they're probably going to help out,
But could be.
knowing
Yeah.
the situation we had been in before.
Yeah. That's a fair thought. Yeah.
Archer is kashat.
Kashat. Well, that's a very appropriate word, isn't it? Kashat.
okay, you know how I like to step out on those tree branches
Oh,
and
yeah.
almost fall off.
I didn't bring my saw.
Thank you. I started thinking about Abraham sending Hagar away and how God tells us to treat the fatherless, the widow, the orphan, someone like that. And Wanda and I were talking, I don't think it was only the boy and Hagar. I don't have any scripture to back it up, just speculating that they could have went out, maybe 3 or 4 camels, maybe a couple of servants, as somebody to help. Doesn't really matter. They ran out of water as a group, and since Hagar's focus was on Ishmael and the story centered around that, that the whole group ran out of water, and we were going back and forth. Well, it doesn't really say, but they weren't alone because he wouldn't have sent her out empty-handed where she was just destitute. I don't think.
I think you're probably right. I hadn't thought
that.
about that, but I agree with you.
Isn't Egypt usually considered a type of the world system? So Ishmael was more or less not the son of promise, he would have been connected with Egypt in his marriage.
Yep. I think that's right. Now, the tradition has it that Ishmael is the father of today's Arabs. Okay, so they still live there, if you will. And they, well, notwithstanding Mohammed, they're still obviously quite worldly. Okay, we got enough time to read this last little part of the chapter. Would somebody like to read from verse 22 to the end of chapter 21?
I'm forcing it on to Margaret. Because I don't want to get up anymore. I'm tired of this.
Gripe.
Tired.
Tord.
And it came to be at the time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, Elohim is with you in all that you do. And now swear to me by Elohim not to be untrue to me, to my offspring, or to my descendants. Do to me according to the kindness that I have done to you and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham said, I swear. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servant had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this deed, neither did you inform me, nor did I hear until today. So Abraham took sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what are these 7 ewe lambs which you have set by themselves? And he said, take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, and be my witness that I have dug this well. So he called that place Beer-sheba, because the two of them swore an oath there. Thus they made a covenant at Beer-sheba, and Abimelech rose with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. And he planted a tamarisk tree in Beer-sheba, and there called on the name of Yahweh, the everlasting El. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines many days.
Okay, getting out of order, let's talk to geography first. There's Beersheba. Beersheba is clearly the last large city in Israel from the south. Going south, once you get to Beersheba, the only thing down there after that's Eilat, and that's way down on Eilat is down here. Okay, so Beersheba, it's a big place. It's by Israeli standards, I'm sure it's several 100,000 people today. It's a good-sized place. It reminds me of Phoenix, really. There's, when in the middle of the summer the sand blows and it's dusty, and it looks a lot like it looks out here. They've got some tall buildings. So anyway, but obviously that's not what it looked like when it was nothing when Abraham and Abimelech made their treaty. But there was a well there. And the discussion here is that Abraham had dug the well, and Abimelech's servants had said, that's our well. And so whenever, we'll talk in a minute about what the first of the chapter says, or first of the section says, whenever they wanted to make this treaty, and Abraham kind of sealed the treaty with the 7 ewe lambs. What's the Hebrew word for 7? Sheva. And what's the Hebrew word for well? Be'er. So Beer Sheva is the well of 7. And then the word beer can sometimes mean oath. So that's where Beersheba gets its name. And if you go there today, you can even go to the place where there's a bunch of old tamarisk trees growing, and they tell you that that's Abraham's well. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, it's there.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
like the Old West, the cattle and the sheep,
Yep.
water rights.
Oh, yeah. Water's a big deal in the desert, as you well know. Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to the first of the section, starting in verse 24. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness that I have shown to you. Why do you suppose Abimelech would want to do this? Yes.
Well, I'm interested in this guy here, Phicol.
Fecal. Yeah.
It says in the Strong's it means mouth of all. I try to interpret that as a big mouth.
Big mouth. Could be.
A propagandist making statements that aren't accurate, like Isaac is the son of Abimelech. I'm suggesting that.
Okay. Interesting. That's interesting. I didn't know any of that about it. I'm not, it seems to me that name may come up again somewhere, but I don't know a lot about Fecal.
So
My question, though, is
he's making what's going on? He's making a claim about. Didn't he give this land to, to Abraham?
yeah, but what he's wanting to do here, he's wanting to have a treaty. He's wanting to document something. He wants to enter into a covenant, as a matter of fact, it says.
But then Abimelech later on says, I don't know anything about this. I don't know there was any controversy. Isn't that right?
No, are you talking about several chapters coming?
No. In these first few verses, doesn't he say, I don't know anything about this? Maybe
No,
I'm
that
misreading.
was just the well.
Okay.
So he
well,
gets together with them and he says, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants, and show me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness that I've shown to you. Why would he want to do that?
Well, what instigated this whole thing?
That's what I'm asking.
I gave you my conspiracy theory. I don't know what else you want.
Abraham, from his opinion, from Abimelech's opinion, dealt with him falsely before concerning
Yeah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to see that happen again, with anybody in
Yeah.
his kingdom.
Okay, so what you're saying, it could still be some leftover remnants of the fear he felt on the night of the dream. Yeah, okay.
So, and that fear from that night, he spread to his fellow countrymen and all his servants, saying, hey, wait, this guy's a prophet. He can see that he's still dwelling in that region.
Yep.
So he could see the blessing or the favor of his God on him, whether he's prospering and getting more cattle, more sheep, more servants. But the point is, he's thinking, well, wait a minute, this guy's going to outgrow me at any point, and we better make sure that since he's in our land, we're covered.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. He looks at Abraham and he says, man, this guy is successful, and that God that he talks about is still doing all kinds of great things. Let's make sure and keep everything really good between us. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, I always like it when I see God's name called upon, and here we have, in Hebrew, it's El Olam. In verse 33, called on the name of the Lord, El Olam.
El Olam. Okay, the eternal God. Okay. John.
I haven't studied this too much, but maybe it seems to me that Abraham's being rather fickle about who he enters into covenant with. Assuming you think badly of, I'm not putting the best.
Okay, I think I see what you're saying. He's not being very careful about who he signs a covenant with.
Right.
Abraham.
We don't even know what the reasoning is.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
let's enter into a covenant.
Yeah, I don't know. It occurred to me if I were in Abraham's shoes, I wouldn't have any reason not to do this. Sure, I won't treat you falsely. I won't. It sounds kind of like Abimelech is afraid that one of these days Abraham's going to get mad at him and come over and clean his clock or something. But I don't see that happening, and I don't see why Abraham should concern himself
Yeah,
about
why
that.
is he, what's in it for Abraham? I'm not
But
trying to be,
I don't
you
see
know.
much. Well, I don't know. I don't see much of it in it for Abraham. But then he goes on and he
he's
brings
not
up.
making it with Abraham. He's making it off with this
But
Pico guy who may very well be the agent, but is he a rogue agent, or is he doing what Abimelech really wants?
I don't know.
They already had a covenant, I thought, or at least an agreement.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Verse 24, Abraham says, "I swear it." So he's basically saying, I mean, to me, like you say, he's got nothing to lose. There's nothing in it for him either. He says, "Okay, I promise to treat you fairly," which he would have done anyway.
So why do I need to sign?
I don't know. Maybe it's a lot of this is, I think, just there to tell us how the Beersheba got its name. But really. But anyway, so then he brings up, Abraham says, well, okay, we'll sign this treaty, but as long as we're talking about being fair, your guys stole this well that I dug. And Abimelech basically says, wow, I didn't know anything about that. I never heard about it till today. And so part of the reason for this treaty is to verify the owner of that well, Abraham. And that's what he says. He says, what are these 7 lambs for? He says, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well.
So if this is his land that he gave him before, then the agreement that this is my well has already been established.
Well, yeah, except that it seems like his servants didn't get the memo
Well,
because they took it back.
so can I, as someone who's studied sovereignty and the Patriot
Okay.
stuff and all that,
Yep.
one of the things you want to be very, very careful about is contracts you sign,
Yes.
like especially with the state. Why am I entering into this contract? Is this some right that I already had before,
Yeah.
and you're just sort of putting a facade over it so you have control over it in some way? Are you converting a right into a privilege? So I'm just saying, is Abraham not thinking this through? And we don't know. We can't learn from our mistakes until we make mistakes. I understand that, but
Yeah.
is that something to read into this?
Well, it might very well be. It might very well be. Polly's got something, even though you're tired. Tarred.
Just being in one of these wells recently and looking up and around, it is a really big deal to dig a well out of bedrock.
Yep.
And it could have just been the fact that Abraham and his servants went through a whole lot of work to dig that well, and maybe it was something that was meaningful to him, and he just wanted to be acknowledged that this was our well, we did the work here, and someone just came along and usurped everything we did
Yeah.
and took claim to it, and they had nothing to do with the hard work and labor of actually getting the well here.
Yep. Well, I think there's, I think it's a
So-
lot that. I think that's the major part of it. Furthermore, when we read about Abimelech again in the life of Isaac, these wells are, the same thing is still happening.
So go to Abimelech with your claim and your
Yeah.
prior agreement that you already have and say, resolve this issue.
Well, and
I
he'll
want
say,
due process.
yeah, well, you're right.
Based on what's
But-
already
and-
established.
And if he's found in default, where would they go?
Well, fine. At that point, you renegotiate the contract, or what? Then the question is, why am I contracting with someone who's not going to uphold his end of the agreement? I don't want a contract with that guy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at.
I'll be real quick because of time. In verse 24 of chapter 21, where Abraham says, I swear it, word is used as shavah, which is, again, 7.
Okay.
So it's like making a declaration 7 times to oneself, saying, this is,
Okay.
I swear it. So
Okay.
when Beersheba or Shavah, there's so many places.
It's a
there.
well of oath or a well of 7.
Yeah, it's so many, because there's 7 ewe lambs and there's Shavah. And so,
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Just another small thought about the well. Being in that area where we were in the bottom of a well, it doesn't rain all the time. That was their source of water. On the few days that they had rain, they collected it there, and that's what they used to live on throughout the rest of the year and to feed their animals and their family until it rained again. So the water source being saved in those
Oh,
wells
yeah.
was a very big deal in the Negev.
It sure was. And the ownership thereof was too.
There's a saying in Hebrew that's easy to remember. Beli mayim ein hayim. Without water, there is no life.
There you go.
And that's, when you're in the desert, water is life.
Yep. Just like it is here.
Just like it is here, yeah.
Yep.
That doesn't negate anything I'm saying.
No.
I'm certainly not saying that it's not a valuable, water is a valuable thing in the desert. Of course it is.
It does not negate anything you're saying.
This guy is the prophet of Yahweh. Why is he entering into contracts casually with people? That's my question.
I don't know.
Where's Persia on the map? It's not on the
Persia?
map.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. Here, it's over here.
So it's not
But
on
let
the
me
map.
give you another map. Persia is right over, there's Nineveh. Nineveh's in Assyria. Persia's over here. Here's Babylon, Babylonians. Persia's right in here. Esther lived in Susa. Susa's not shown on the map, but it's around in here. Sure. I've gone over. I hardly ever do that. So let me close in prayer. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for these discussions. We all learn so much. I know I do. Just help us to think on these things and to just be preoccupied with your word, Father God, until we meet together again. Bless us and keep us safe. In Yahushua's name, amen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you a lot.